grows fast. It's relatively inexpensive, so a lot of people don't care for it. But Douglas fir, vertical grain fir, is one of the most beautiful woods in the world, and people disrespected it because you could buy studs for it with it. And if you look at, well, you've been tearing apart houses that were built in the 40s, and there's vertical grain, full, generous 2x4 studs. Beautiful stuff.
Yeah, my house was built in 1928 and have a lot of it.
Yeah. So because something's inexpensive doesn't mean it's not gorgeous. And so this poplar isn't gorgeous, but it's going to do for us. So
where do you get this from? Is that just from Home Depot or?
no, this one I purchased when I was at a course in Utah. I've taken a bunch of courses because
For the hardwoods is one place you can get it.
yeah.
It's not cheap.
I'm running out of time to be. I was self-taught to start with and did a lot of reading, but I wasn't doing as the quality of work that I really wanted to. So I've been to a couple of courses to jumpstart that, because I practiced pediatrics for too long and I never had any real free time. So I've taken courses, but we're going to do this one with a screw chuck. With a screw chuck, this is the depth you want, plus 1 millimeter. You don't want to drill a hole, much deeper than you need, because you can go penetrate into part of the wood you want to keep. So I just pick a depth stop. I make it out of a piece of scrap. If you use one of these little collars, that works as a stop, but they have an obnoxious tendency to come loose. And then if it's loose and you keep pushing, you can ruin an expensive piece of wood. So this is a little easier for me, and it's sort of idiot proof.
So you got to drill exactly.
You're not too worried about
vertical, right?
I've set this jig for the depth that I want.
Straight up and down.
It's got to be.
Oh,
Perpendicular to the face.
yeah, I'm pretty good at that. I'm not perfect at it. You could do that in a drill press.
Thing is, when you
straight, then as you tighten it up, you will bend your screw chuck, and after a couple of times of bending it forward backwards, it will just break off one day.
Yeah, that's not what I wanted to do for a demo, though, is to bend the screw chuck, because it's mine. Anyway, so I'm learning how to use Larry's tool.
Nope. Yeah, turn it all the way down.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to just come up on here with the screw chuck. Whoops. There we are. See, that's why I wanted the low torque thing. Larry, is it possible we could
Stop the machine.
Yeah. Sometimes when
I asked you this too.
No, I asked you to put it on the low torque, and because we're not going to go over about 500 RPMs. The formula for RPM and this, everybody's got one, but if you have the oh, thanks, Larry. That's great. Okay. Larry doesn't use the on-off switch. He uses
The directional switch.
the directional switch. I'm going to have trouble with that because
Do it however you want. You're turning.
Okay, I'm used to turning the lathe off when I move things around and then having a look. So. Okay, now, in order to get that tight, this is, all these screw chucks have a little...
No. Oh, okay. I was gonna say,
Larry,
use
let me
that
turn.
thing.
Larry, let me turn. I'm not gonna, I'm gonna use my own demo here. You want this to be pretty tight, don't want it to be super tight, but you have to hold the screw chuck in place, and that's why I use this. On my lathe, which is smaller, I can rotate this around and it binds on the ways, and I can undo things with it too. Okay, So, this is actually fairly stable. You can use a faceplate if you want. Screw chuck is just faster. But I always put things between centers if I've got any possibility to do so. The trouble with this screw center, I haven't ground off this point. This little point here sticks in almost 1/8 of an inch. And what that does is it makes a little hole. And if you don't, cut that off, it leaves a little black dot. That's one of the defects on this bowl. So the way you can get around that you can either take a block, this is glued to a little piece of leather, I can come up and
That's a good idea.
hold that, and then I don't have the little hole in.
That's a very good.
Or if this hole was something that I left a little detail for, this was round in the bottom. If I wanted to scoop that out more, fine. But you always run into the danger with a platter like this. There's a pinch point. So where the mortise goes in 1/8 of an inch, maybe 3/16, and the bottom comes in right there, is the place where you're going to screw things up. This is the narrowest part of the bowl, and so you don't necessarily want to be able to plan to cut off a whole lot of this stuff. You may not have that stuff left. So I think this is just sort of a little simpler. And I think, Larry, if I can move these out of the way, because I'm going to start making chips fly. Anyway, we've all set up stuff on the lathe, and there's no such thing as one way to do it. And next we measure. And let's see, I had a tape and pencil.
Pencil, there's a pencil right there on the side of the,
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
pencils I have all over the
That one.
place.
All right. So marking this out, there's sort of a general rule of thirds. It's not biblical. You can fiddle with it anywhere you want. This is 14 inches in diameter, so it's about 7 inches radius, and so I'm going to mark out roughly. 7 divided by 3 is, call it 2.5. So there's 2.5 and 5. These are very crude. And I'm just going to come up with a, this is just for starters. And I'm going to look at that and see what do I like and what do I not like about it. I'm going to make this measurement very precise in a second. This ring here, the middle third, is the foot ring, and that's underneath. Depending on people's taste, that can be either very thin or very wide. It depends on really the shape of the bowl you're going to use and what you're going to use it for. If you're going to store your rock collection in it, you probably want a fairly wide foot ring. If you're going to, put Christmas ornaments in it, you don't need that much. So I think this is probably more foot ring than we're going to want. And we're going to make that a little narrower. But this is the critical dimension. You've got some dividers here. We want to design this to fit the chuck that you're going to use. A little clumsy just because I always have things where I want them to be. Ideally, your chuck for an expansion and a compression, you want it nearly closed. The wider open it is, it's going to bind on just one spot. If it's an expansion, if it's compression, if it gets too wide, instead of getting that whole dovetail gripping, you're just gonna grip it in a couple spots. And for something that's this big around that's spinning, I don't want it to turn into a spaceship. So this, if I'm going to measure this, I know the answer though. It's 4 7/8 of an inch. So I don't want this opening here of the mortise to be anything more than about 5 inches. And that way it's going to open, and it's going to have a lip that's going to grip the mortise all the way around, and it's going to be stable, because there's going to be a point where I'm going to not have the center support anymore.
We're going to grab it from the inside.
Yeah,
Expanding.
5 inch diameter inside, and everybody's chucks from different manufacturers are different. But I think I like to measure this when there's, about 1/8 of an inch between the jaws. That way you've got a little bit of slush if you want to tighten it up. But you don't want these open even 1/4 of an inch or more. You just lose some of the function. Okay, so let's see what I've got here. I'm going to do this just visually, and that's about 4 3/4. So with that in mind, Larry has one of the most important tools a wood turner can own, which is a Sharpie. And I'm going to cut the mortise to here. I can always make it bigger. In fact, I'm going to take the tailstock back and check to make sure I've cut it big enough. But this is an important line. This line here is one that's a little slushier, okay? So, this is a wood beater gouge. It's a 3/4 inch bar. I use this for the roughing stuff, and that's just...
You normally wear a mask?
What?
You wear a mask?
No, not today. And with the coarse shavings, some wood makes a lot of fine dust just when you turn it. Wet wood usually doesn't, and I don't use a mask for that. Sanding, I always do. We're not going to turn on the machine and have you watch sanding today. We're going to talk about when we do it, but we're not going to, plague anybody with dust in the air.
So I noticed that you put the marks on it rather than flatten it out first and then put the marks in.
Yeah, this is, I could have taken off some of the rough stuff and then put the marks, but I'm actually going to, I'm going to start roughing this out pretty quickly, and then I'll clean that up a little bit later. It doesn't matter. I like to keep as much material on it until I'm ready for it to go. Tailstock at, this is about center height.
What tool are you using?
So okay, this is a roughing bull gouge. It's wood beater. It's called. It's very heavy. Compare that to my standard bull gouge, and it's sharpened at about 55 degrees. And this tool is, if you hold it down here and it's as heavy as this, you can take off wood like crazy. It's really, I've roughed out, I don't know, maybe 60 of those acacia bowls, and you just don't want to be jerking around with a lightweight tool with that.
Yeah.
With acacia. It's set at super low speed.
That's super low.
It's on. You need to turn the dial up.
Well, say I'm doing that, Larry.
Not again.
Oh.
All right, so
When you turn this on, the direction has to be set to 0. Turn it on. Nice, turn it on.
okay. All right, so the 14-inch bowl running at 500 RPM, 14 times 5, that's about 7,000. I'm looking for somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 as a product of the diameter times the RPM. So this great big beautiful heavy lathe is not rattling, but I usually, something like this, about 500 is good for me. And we're just gonna flatten that up. We've got rattle, we're not down yet. Come on. I can come in this way. All right. I'm going to finish that with the bowl gouge to clean that up, but I'm going to use the big heavy one for this part. I think we could use a little more speed here. One thing I'm not going to do is cut all the way up to this top edge just yet, because it will splinter out. So I've left about 1/8 of an inch. When we clean this up a little bit, next thing I'm going to do is come in from the top and take out any irregularities so that I know exactly where my rim is. If I'm looking at it, I can even see it from now. The rim is not, we're not flat yet. This looks flat, but it isn't. So the measurements we're going to want to make are how much rim do we want? Where do we start the cut from the foot ring out? So we'll get the tool rest a little better shape here. Now, if I just turn this on without going back and forth,
Yes,
that's
set it to 0. The
Okay.
direction now, direction. No, direction, there we go.
Yeah.
Turn that to 0. Now turn, it's on,
okay.
it's humming. So now you turn it, there you go.
All right. Okay, so this is now in a plane on the top and almost cleaned up here on the side. I'm going to come back and make this flat with the more delicate gouge. And we're going to mark the rim. Then we're going to cut in from the foot ring up to the rim, and that's where you get to be creative.
That's your outside shape of the bottom of the bowl platter.
Yeah, we're not cutting the inside yet. We're going to turn around eventually to do that. But the shape that we're going to do now is really the one that's going to decide what you're going to look like. So I'm going to do something similar to this. We're going to cut the mortise. There'll be a foot ring, and then there's some kind of a shape from here up. And this could be rounded, it could be a scoop. There's any number of things you can do. I'm going to cut one that's sort of like this OG, and that's what's coming up next. But Okay.
I keep getting shocked every time I touch it. It's
Hmm?
a chair.
What?
Oh, yeah, plastic chair.
Yeah.
All right. Takes a little while to get used to a different set of controls.
Well, at least it has the new potentiometer in it.
Well, yeah, you know, again, my lathe and a lot of you have jets and Powermatics. If you turn it on and off, you turn it back on, you're going to be at the same RPM that you were. That's a danger if you bump the rotational speed with your elbow. You turn it on and it's going 5,000 RPMs with a bowl like that. You're going to make a hole in somebody's window. So forgive me for a little bit of that inefficiency. Okay. We've got the rim. This is fairly true. If this is going to be a flat rim, you're going to want the rim to be roughly the same thickness as the wall of your bowl. If you're going to have contours on the rim, it needs to be a little bit thicker. So I'm going to make mine. Okay, this is where Larry. Sorry about that. I just keep.
Direction.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah. All right.
No, it's already on.
Yeah, I know
Once
it's
it's on, you don't have to worry about it. Just turn this off, then turn it back on.
Okay, that's about 5/8 of an inch, about 1.5 centimeters. And I'm going to make the lining of the wall of the bowl roughly 1 centimeter, and I'm going to put some contour in here. So this is a line I'm not going to want to cut any deeper than I've made this pencil line. And then I'm going to make another line down here at the bottom, just as sort of a gauge for the OG shape that I'm going to make. And I think we're ready. Where are you, a patient man? You can't turn this off without going through all these steps. This is okay. All right.
It's a
So,
grizzly.
I had a quick question. If I understood you right, you're going to make the walls about 1 centimeter thick. Is that what you said?
Right.
Which is what 3.3.
It's about 3/8.
About 3/8.
Yeah.
And then you made the lip 5/8.
Right. That's because I'm not going to leave that lip flat. I'm going to contour it. And if I made it just 1 centimeter and I contoured it, it would be too thin. So it's always easier to make something thinner. In pottery, you can add it back, but we can't.
Well, that's what reverse is for.
So I make a decision that that's about the amount of foot ring that I want. When this is bulky on the outside, you want to stay between centers. By the time I've unweight some of the outside, I feel a little freer to remove some of the center support. But if I did that now and I'm leaning on it, especially with a dull tool, you'd be in trouble. So I'm going to just take out some bulk here now. This is all very rough at this point. But my foot ring, I don't want to have the foot ring sitting flat and then just start there at the bottom. It makes it look too heavy and clunky. So I want to have a little air at the edge of the foot ring before I come up into the shape. So that's, well, my first cut, and I'm now going to look at what to do about the shape here. And I want to come up from this round and then blend into a curve that comes up and meets this line up here. Does that make sense?
Oji.
And yeah, and you know, however you want to make that shape is totally up to you. It depends something on how you plan to use it, and what you like. There's no right and wrong. Well, most of you looking at that say, well, it's getting there, but it's got sort of a clumsy hump here. Again, that's just all aesthetics, but I'm going to refine this curve, take a little bit of the bulk off, and then this stage is pretty much done. Let's see. That's a little bit more like what I was expecting. If we were you know, doing sanding and stuff, this is a point where you can refine this curve with a little shear cut and then sand it now, because this thing is very stiff. You can sand it, it's not going to warp, it's not going to wobble, it's not going to make you know, depressions into the summer wood and then back off in the winter wood. Like I said, we're not going to spend time sanding, but normally I'm almost at the point where I would do a little bit of sanding just to save myself some time in the future. So this will just be a little bit of a finish cut. Smooth enough to sand pretty soon. But I think for the purposes of going, it's time to start on the mortise. I'm going to start the cut in the mortise, then I'm going to have to back this off to finish it. This would be just like, you know, any bowl that you cut, except I'm only going to make the mortise about 3/16 of an inch. You don't need, you know, to make that mortise as deep as you might think. If you're trying to make a mortise that's going to hold a big, heavy bowl, then you probably make it a little deeper. But this is 5 inches in diameter. What the circumference is 15 inches. If this is gripping on a 15-inch hold, it's really quite solid. It doesn't need to be sunk in too deep. If you're making out a softwood, sink it deeper. If you're making out a punky wood, I wouldn't even do it. You know, it's if you, yeah, I wouldn't try to ever put a mortise in that spalted wood. You
Not
know,
an
you just-
expanding mortise, maybe a contracting one.
yeah, no, yeah. And yeah, the other thing, you know, we're doing this one with a mortise. If you had a narrower piece of wood, let's say it was only 1.5 inches instead of a full 2, yeah, you could always glue a block on there and cut a standard tenon spigot on it. There's no such thing as just one way. Anyway, just going to get this one started. Okay, so here's the moment of truth. This is where I need to remove this in order to cut this mortise. The secret of doing that is, of course, very light cuts, and whenever you possibly can, you're pushing inwards towards the center of the lathe. You're not pulling out. The last thing you want to do is, again, put too much torque on that screw thread, or with softer wood, try to tweak it. So I think we're ready for this. I'm going to just leave this on here. At home, I've got a little some pieces of 1.5" PVC that I slide over here, so I don't put my elbow into that little thing. This thing is protecting me nicely, though. Okay.
That's the kind of thing you do once
Hmm?
that's the kind of thing
Yeah.
you do once and you say,
Well,
oh boy,
you
I'm
know.
not doing that
Or
again."
6 or 7 times.
Yeah. In school, we all learned how to, penetrate joints and inject them with steroids and stuff. But I don't trust this to do that. This little centerpiece here, all it really has to be is deeper than the foot ring. So I actually leave it with a little bit of a dome as long as it's deeper. And I see that I still have to finish off a little bit of this stuff. All right, here we go. Let's see if I can get this right.
Turn it off.
Yeah,
There you go. Nope. You gotta wait until this thing starts.
oh, okay,
As soon as it starts humming, you're good.
all right, beautiful.
Childproofing, right?
Yeah,
Like
Or adult proofing in some cases. Took me a while to figure that out too. Alright, why is that working?
So maybe your potential wasn't broken. You just forgot
No,
to
it
switch
was.
on.
It was. I just turned that thing all the way up to 3,500 and it wouldn't even come on. So it would come on, or 32, but it would come on a little over that and then stop.
you can use a ruler to check to see if this is cut deep enough. It's not quite. One of the things I use at home, this sticks on a magnet, sticks on the side of the lathe. This is straight edge, so if I'm inside a small bowl, I can see if I've got the contours the way I want. A little bit larger, a little bit larger, a little bit larger. It's just sort of a handy thing to have around.
Was that masonite?
Yeah, and I look at that. I can see light underneath here, but I'm going to take that down just a little bit more. Here we are. Thank you. Perfect. That should be plenty. I don't want to take any more material off of here than I absolutely have to. I mean, it's not hurting anything. And then, it's a catch.
That was part of the demo.
Yeah,
But not today.
if you don't get a catch sometime in your demo, then it means that you owe the devil some time. This is it's a very handy. It's a box scraper that I've cut on a little bit of a bevel, and it's just really handy if it's razor sharp for getting inside this kind of cast.
Yeah, you gotta have enough of a flat there for your chuck, for the chuck to sit on.
Exactly. So I'm going to make sure.
Is there an angle to that?
Yeah, it's.
That's what he's using the box thing for.
There we are. This is cut on roughly the angle that I want, but I just sort of drove that in to give me a dovetail, and the this step, I just want to make sure this is going to fit, and it does. So I'm ready now. If I were doing this at home and I was, not looking at a timetable, you can either finish this now or later. I'm going to talk about how we're going to finish it later, because this little edge, this is an ugly edge. It's got torn grain on it. You're not going to want this to be visible in your finished product. So once we cut the inside out, I'm going to flip it back, and I'll smooth that off, and I'll do something nice with it. But for right now, it's round. It's going to hold that, and we're ready for removing this from the screw. If you ever have you ever broken a drill bit? Yeah. So I had a 12-inch 5/16 inch drill bit that I broke off, and I'm a pack rat. My wife will confirm that. And I kept it around for years. I didn't throw it away because it just, it's hard, high-speed steel, and, real handy thing. And then I finally had a chance to use it, and I use this thing all the time. Okay, so here we are. There's a shape on the bottom. You could probably make the shape anything you wanted. You probably make it prettier than this. If I were making this and I wasn't happy, I would put it back on and make it happy, because I can't get back there very easily. So the next step is we're going to clean this off, hollow out the middle. We're going to talk about depth, and then it'll start looking like a platter. So now, Larry, you showed me where the
You stood right there.
yeah, okay.
The other end,
It's all safer to get another platter
That
out
goes
of
in
this.
there, right into this one.
Okay.
There.
All right. Again, a big handle is so much easier than trying to use a wrench on this.
That would be where he could. He would probably make 1,000 paper plates.
It's interesting that that at least the lathe manufacturers have gotten together to make the spindles pretty much uniform. If they were like cars or something, that be every brand, you'd have to buy their brand name chucks and all of that.
Yeah.
So there must have been some kind of a meeting. I don't think our president was at that meeting to get people to work together. Okay.
Or you don't need the club president.
No, we're not. Our club president would have made it even
Chuck
better.
president.
Yeah. With these chucks, I've been instructed, and I believe I go over them, especially something as critical as this. Each time you tighten it, it can loosen or tweak the other side. So I do 4 of those. It's probably not necessary, but the last time this is the last place I want to blow it. Let's just put it that way.
And you don't want to push too hard, because you will crack the plate in half, right? I mean, it's got a lot of force.
Right. Well, yeah. Again, that's if you were doing something on your scale with stuff that's 1/8 of an inch thick, and you put a whole lot of pressure on wood, some wood will give way, and if you have wood that's got a lot of defects in it, after you've detensioned it, it's going to start to crack and move. Pieces will fly off. So you want this to be tight, but you're not in a Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of contest to see how tight you can make it. So this is running smoothly, pretty much right at center height here, and so I'm going to face this off, and then I'm going to clean this out. The place where I'm going to start these cuts is roughly about here. I want to make roughly 1.5 inch rim on it, and I'm going to contour that. So I'm going to cut from the inside, but I'm going to use this line to tell me that that's as far to the out as I want to go.
Because now the outside they say now there is a right and a wrong.
Oh, yeah,
The
yeah.
outside,
Right.
everything goes, but
Okay.
on the inside, that's different.
So let me show, I'm gonna mark another line just to illustrate what you just said.
Working, working.
See this, this line here?
Swap chairs.
This line, we're gonna cut that right off, but that corresponds to the outer margin of the chuck. And that's where the wood, instead of being 2 inches thick, is 2 inches minus the depth of the mortise. So this is the danger zone. If I carve out and I get if I take too much wood out and I hit this point, then I'm going to make it too thin. And you don't want to have a bowl that's 1 centimeter thick on the outside and 1/8 of an inch thick in the middle, because yeah, it's no good. That's an error that you can't really fix.
And you don't want the chisel tip to
Yeah,
meet the
so-
edge of the chuck.
Yeah. So this is, you know, if I were if I didn't trust myself, I could make a mark on the center post and say this is where you got to be extra careful. It's like when you drive in a parking lot, you got to be super careful. You don't want to run over anybody. You don't want to door ding anybody's Mercedes.
He's
And
fun.
you know, when you're on I-80 in Nevada, you can kind of relax a little bit, but not when you're here. Okay. All right, now let's see. On,
Okay.
all right. I guess the other thing that we might do here, forgive me, is why not, let's do this between centers and save ourselves maybe a little bit of grief.
You have that line that describes where not to go into.
Yeah, this is the line. This is going to be the edge of the rim, and I'm going to start cutting in here. And this I just put just to illustrate, you know, where I don't want to go, you know, carelessly anyway. I don't mind going there, but yeah, the centers, man. I made the largest bowl I ever made was about 23 inches in diameter. It was about 7 inches deep. It was redwood, and I turned it outboard on a 12-inch lathe. And yeah, the lathe wanted to dance all over. It was a big, beautiful bowl, and we put it on the hearth underneath a large painting made by my mother-in-law. She was a professional at that craft, and I had hung it on the wall with a couple of concrete anchors in the mortar of the chimney. Well, this was a big, heavy painting, and the wire broke. You know, my anchor was, and it came down and landed on the bowl and broke it. And I said, you know, she and I used to argue a lot about, you know, nicely, but after she died, you know, her painting got even with me for winning that argument. So I went back and I glued it together, but after having been broken, it was quite distorted and detension, and there were rough edges. So I went back to put it on the lathe, and again I was doing this outboard on a small lathe, and I, you know, roughened up the base, put on a backing board, glued it, made a spigot, and I chucked it back up. And I was merrily, you know, smoothing that bowl out. Well, the glue left and it blew off and it broke my toe. And I thought, you know, this woman, you know, she just never relents. Okay. Okay. Joe, I think, probably has the keenest sense of distance of anybody here, because you've been working in 10,000ths of an inch on occasion. But, you know, I can feel that this is, you know, 1.125 inch and a quarter even. So I've got plenty of room to go. There are ways you can measure this. You can use calipers. I'm not there yet, but, you know, if this was a really thin piece of wood, 1.5 or 1.25 inch, you would want to check your depth here fairly frequently. I'm going to leave a big chunk in the middle because that's, you know, it helps keep it stiff. I'm going to take that out later, but I'm not going to worry about trying to get all the way to the center with these cuts. All right, so it's starting to take shape. We still have plenty of material here. I'm going to take one more cut and then we're going to work on a little contour here. One of the things that I brought, it won't really work here. Let's see where I put it. In my lathe, I've made a couple of these. They sit between the ways. They won't. It doesn't fit between your ways. But when I'm working like this, I keep my tool here. That way, it's out of shape. It's not going to roll off a table. It's not going to hurt. I'm not going to dull the edge on a piece of metal. It's going to drop in, and there's just nothing but space underneath there. When I move this back and forth, this comes out, and I just put it right back. So, yeah, this is just something real simple to
Yeah.
do, and kind
That's
of.
why I like my my thing there, because
Yeah, you know exactly where it is.
I put them in there and
Yeah.
just let them sit in there.
I always get nervous about putting something down where it's going to roll off.
Yeah.
That's another reason I don't ever turn with sandals on. Yeah. Okay.
Because you broke your toe once.
Yeah. One more, and then we're ready for finishing cuts a little bit later. I'm going to use a bottoming gauge when we get down to the bottom for finishing cut, bottoming gouge. You familiar with those? Oh, this is a life changer. Okay, so at this point, this is flat. I don't want it to be flat. I want it to have a little bit of a sort of ergo contour. So I'm going to round one end off and round this end off just a little bit. And I'm going to do that while it's between centers and still fairly thick. But this edge, one of the reasons we finished out to the edge is that I want to know exactly where we stand with this one. So I'm going to just pull this back a little bit. And then okay, so it's still crude, but it's, you know, it's getting a little bit of a shape here. This is similar to the shape that's on there. It doesn't have to be exaggerated. You can exaggerate it if you want. I could have undercut this if I wanted to make another detail. I'm just going to want the the shape to smooth up into here and then be smooth around on the other side to kind of be a reflection of that. So I'm just going to use a, just a little shallow finishing cut on this. The shear cut, on a really steep angle, you're just taking off, very, very fine shavings, and it's a nice way to follow a curve. I still have a crease here, but the goal here is to make this smooth rather than to remove a whole lot of material. And this, I think I need to be a little bit deeper. I don't want to take too much off here anymore because this is about the thickness that I want it. And this is now finished enough. There's tool marks, of course, but they're not bad. And with a softwood like poplar, this will sand out really quickly and really easily. So I'm not going to mess with this too much more with the tool. I think we're pretty much close to there. And the next question is, do I need to take more off here? And again, the thickness here, that's generous. But remember, I've got 3/16 of an inch less as soon as I move inside that mortise. So I'm going to take off, practically no more because I'm going to do that with finishing cuts. I think we're getting pretty close. So at this point, I think we're ready to, I'm going to test my memory again when I turn this back on. Let's see if we pull it off.
Between turning it on and off,
What?
just to stop it while you're checking it,
Yeah.
just use the directional control.
Okay.
It stops it, and you don't have to reset your speed every time.
All right, that's a voice of experience. Okay, so I've got this big chunk in here. If I had this much material outside without center, I'd be anxious about it. But in here, I'm going to be cutting this down. I'm going to be, moving down into the center of the chuck, and it's going to stay put. Okay.
Turn
On.
direction. Direction to 0.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
What speed are you going?
I'm about 550. Yeah, and again, that formula, RPMs times the diameter, somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000. If it's rough and wobbly, you lower. If you're doing finishing cuts, make it higher so that the piece, if it's running too slow and the piece is very thin and you're taking rough cuts, you'll deform it. You'll push it in and it will go back and forth, and that's how you get spiraling. If you have a dull tool and the RPM is too low, and if you're pushing too hard, you put all of that together, you wind up having to correct mistakes by taking more and more material off the bottom, and eventually you make a funnel. So we're not going to do that. Anyway, this part, I'm going to lower the tool rest just a little bit to get into the middle. All right. Okay, see, I'm still down to the hole where I had the screw chuck in. I'm hoping to see the bottom of that before too long. And indeed, we're outside. When you're removing stuff that you're going to throw away, it's a really good time to practice getting that little nub out of the middle. You've seen that one. Yeah, you get down here. if you push that too fast, it breaks off and it tears grain and it makes a mess. And so the secret there is really sharp tool. Just really take your time and come up underneath it very slowly. If the little nub falls off into your gouge, you're pretty sure you cut it off rather than broke it off. So there's all these chances you have to practice stuff. And if you screw up, nobody knows because this is all going to the floor. That one broke. Okay, so
What's this life changer tool you're talking about?
that's coming right
The
up.
bottoming tool.
Coming right up.
You can't go with it.
Okay, so this is a little thicker than I want it to be. I can feel that it's it gets quite thick here. It's still thicker than it needs to be over the mortise, but we're getting close. A bottoming tool, a regular gouge has a fingernail grind. You can be
Can you hold
either
one of the camera?
what?
Right in front of your platter. There you go.
Okay. The standard bull gouge has a pulled back wing. Let's see, where?
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, okay.
Turn
And
it sideways.
yeah, and this is designed to go around corners, and it's it's a tool we all know and love. This is called the traditional gouge, and this is almost cut straight across. There's no nose on this to speak of, and this is cut at about a 60-degree angle back here, and then at the edge you finish that off at more like 70. So this is, I'll turn it back around, look at the back edge of it. This is designed to go across the bottom because this is steep enough. You're cutting in grain. The fibers are running this way, and I'm cutting right through those. And so the secret of this is, catching this little narrow bevel, not digging these ends in, which makes a fairly spectacular catch.
Oh, yeah.
And then coming across, but cutting the end grain, off with this more steeply ground edge. And so let's see if we can make that work.
Did you grind that yourself, or is it one that you buy?
I just learned how to use this tool in Provo, and
It's an older tool.
I
It's like this much left.
I used to get catches, and I had a dickens of a time learning it. But once you got it on your side, and you trust it, it just does a really neat job on makes a nice smooth cut, and it comes across, and I'm not getting that nasty spiraling with it. But this thing has to be really sharp. Sharpen it frequently. Poplar's not too challenging, but this is designed. You can go around some shallow corners with it, and then come across. So this is sort of the near finishing tool. I think to finish some of these bottoms, you could use a any kind of a scraper if it's sharp to finish this. We're going to talk about feeling contours because you can close your eyes and you can tell this is proud in the middle. A finish bowl. Larry found out this one. If you rub your hands across it, you can feel the ripples. Just like if you're in a swimming pool, somebody jumps in the other end, you can feel the ripples going up on your neck when they come to you. You can feel them with your hands much more easily than you can see them. Once
If you
they
close
get,
your eyes, you can feel them even better.
and you don't want to close your eyes and feel the edge on your gouge though.
Well, that will be life changing.
Yeah.
hear that rattle? Already, this is telling you that this is getting thin. It means it's going to be moving, and when you hear that hollow sound, I don't want to make this too much thinner. You know, it's just telling you that you're not working with a bowl blank anymore. You have to pick up the cut. Now you can see I've left some ripples here. I'm going to try to clean those up. This and I'm not going to attempt to get this completely smooth in the middle, which we would do with a scraper or a finishing gouge. But this one, it doesn't tear the grain. That's the beautiful part. So much sanding, you're dealing with tear out, especially in the end grain. And because of the design of this, you don't suffer quite so much. Take this down just a little bit more in the middle.
Can you give up your speed in the middle when you're going in the middle?
You can once I'm way down there and going so slowly, it makes a little bit less of a difference. I'm going to look at this with my little gauge, and I can tell this is still proud in the middle. I'm going to leave that there for now because I'm going to concentrate on this. This contour is perfectly okay if you like that. You know, it's a gradual scoop. It's got a little shadow line. You've got something you can grip with your hands. You know, senior citizens and everything. This is okay now. But I'm going to actually undercut that a little bit because I'll explain why. Because then I can put this on another chuck and grip the whole thing and turn it over. So I'm going to undercut this and make the curve. And in order to do that, maybe I'll clean a little bit out with a 1/2 inch gouge, but I'm going to use a 3/8 inch gouge to get in underneath here. So,
Watch somebody while they're standing, you're doing the.
okay, so this is now pretty much cut straight in. I'm still not where I want to go. I'm not worried about some of this roughness here yet because I'm not finished with it, but I'm just making sure that this feels right in my hand. 3/8 inch gouge. You know, a friend of mine said, you know, this is your chainsaw, this is your hatchet, and this is your scalpel. Anyway, I'm going to undercut this a little bit, take a little bit of this bulk out here, and then we're almost finished with the shaping.
Is that the same tool that you did when you were doing the mortise?
Yeah, no, that's just sort of a I was using it as a scraper. You can use it as a little miniature skew if you want. This is just a versatile tool. Yeah, and I use it inside boxes. This is where you don't want to screw up in front of your friends.
I never want to screw up in front of my friends. do, but
If you don't want to.
Okay, so this one, I'm gonna grip this really pretty hard. I don't want it catching and making a mess, because then I've really changed everything. Come in perpendicular. That's what I was talking about. Okay, well, that little catch cost me 1/8 of an inch of lip. What I think I may do is I may just round that over a little bit. But this undercut is, it's going to be handy because I can grip this with rubber buttons. And I'm going to take off just a little bit more material all the way across, and then we're going to reverse chuck it and we'll be done. So I'm going to debulk this a little bit with the bottoming gouge and just sort of glide into the center, and then we're just about at that point. With this, when you start at the edge, start in, you have to march up and then come down. You sort of, it works in a big arc, otherwise you'll catch. And now, you don't even need your fingers to know that there's a ridge here. Sometimes you can mark them with chalk if you need to, but I need to pick up this cut here and just sort of clean that out through. So let's see if I can do that before we back off. Okay, so one more cut and then I'm going to take it off. This is not ready to pass around yet, but we're getting down to the sort of the thicknesses that we talked about. One more pass. There is that little nubbin in the middle. Maybe I'll take that off with this and not. if you have just a little tiny pimple left there in the middle, that disappears with sanding pretty fast. Oops. Did I just turn it off? I
Turned
did.
it off.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right. The middle is the hardest part of the whole piece, you know? Getting it flattening out right.
And that's where you pull out bits of fibers, and once you pull out the fiber, you
Yeah,
never
you're
see it
stuck.
away again.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and
It's hard.
so I think you're always, you're the place where you're going to pull in grain on the platter that's hard to get to is the direct in grain, you know, at the lip. And you know, this is not too bad. This is you know, decent. I need to cut a little bit off the scar that I made, but I think we're about ready to turn it over. You could sand this now. This little nub in the middle will go away pretty quickly. But this is pretty much the shape that I was aiming for. I'm not going to pester anybody with watching me sand, but
What
this
grit
is
would you start with?
what?
What grit would you start with?
With this, probably well, if probably 120. You know, this is fairly soft. You see the grain lines in poplar, they're, you know, ½ inch apart. So that summer growth is going to be very soft. If you use a heavy grit, you're going to dig into the summer growth and it'll leave these little ridges. Douglas fir does that like
Yeah.
crazy, and it's sort of okay, but you know, it can be a nuisance. You know, but for softer woods, anything, unless you've got a lot of torn in grain and a lot of really nasty tough to remove, I try to avoid getting as coarse as 80. Yeah, sometimes you have to, but you know, and you can try it for a very short while.
Well, wrap it over a piece of wood so that
Yeah.
you're
So, for example, if I wanted to see just how this is going to stand,
What have you got there?
this is some 120. I could see that, you know, this actually takes out tool marks fairly quickly. And if I were doing power sanding, if there's anything I say today that's worth remembering, it's with power sanding, you know, use a light touch. Yeah, you don't want to lean on it. If your sandpaper gets hot, it's either dull or you're leaning too hard. If you come in to this center area with it on an angle, you need to do it on an angle to the inside of a bowl. But if you use it on the angle in the middle, I guarantee it'll dig a hole that you're gonna see. And we talked about that a little earlier. And then now, yeah, light touches. When you get into these little crevices, you can't really power sand those. You have to come up with, you put a finger cot on or a glove and you shape the paper around it. You know, this is always a little bit of a labor of love, but you know, fortunately with really sharp tools, I mean, this is not too bad as far as tear. I'm going to trim off just a little bit of that just because it's cosmetic and I don't like it.
I don't know if it's a trick of my eyes or if there's something there, but it looks like there's a spiral cut that comes up around right there somewhere.
Yeah, that may very well possibly be. And what I would do, like I said, is probably go after this with the scraper, really sharp, very fine, paper thin cuts, and that'll take the you know, if there's any little spiral or grooving. I'm not going to do that now because we're not actually going to finish this, but you know, your eyes can see that because you've got light on it and you've got an angle, and it you know, looking at something from an angle is really, you know, a smart way to do it. I'm just going to nip this off just a little bit, and then we're going to flip it over. Now, what I just did is that I left, this is a fairly crisp edge here. You don't want an edge that's sharp. And what I would do normally is, because I don't want it to cut me,
There you go.
I'll just take a little bit off that. It also minimizes the chance that I'll scar it with a inadvertent bang on something. So this is pretty much close to the shape that we're going to want. I think it needs finishing cutting. We could, there's all kinds of time to do that. But what I want to do now is flip it over, and then we'll talk about finishing the bottom, and then we're done. I think one of the critical things to have in any shop is a table, horizontal surface that's clean, somewhere close to your lathe.
How do you keep it clean?
Well, but you need to be able to put something down. If you put it on top of stuff, guaranteed when you finish it to 400 grit and you're almost done, it slides off and scuffs on something on the way down, and it leaves a mark that makes you just miserable forever after. So one more chuck.
I've been using somebody else's name.
Yeah.
And let's see, where did I put
And
that?
I tried to tell him where everything was, and he's like, "Okay, great, got it."
Yeah, right. No,
But it's
Well-
not how you work.
No, but let's see, my button chuck I took off and I put it right over here, hiding in plain sight.
I gotta say, I don't know
That is really something, that chuck there.
that.
Well,
That's one of the primary trucks you end up buying to do stuff like this.
yeah, I got the big one, and it's just really handy. But the nice thing about the undercut here is that I can grip this from the inside and make a very secure grip. And
It's the full man vacuum check.
yeah. So I set these buttons last night. Normally, Murphy's Law. Murphy was one of my ancestral countrymen. The son of a bitch has been following me around forever. Yeah. So
I think we must
normally
be all
this would have been
related.
set up with the buttons in the wrong place, and I would have had to change it. But I actually measured it. And
Are those buttons rubber or something?
they're rubber. Yeah. And there's different designs for this. The thing about this is that if you rely on the sponginess of the rubber to hold a straight contour, it'll hold, but it's not secure. One little catch and it'll wander. So when I'm cutting the bottoms off, cutting spigots off, that kind of thing, I usually use a center until I'm really clear that I'm done. I'm not going to do that here because I'm going to show that this is the point where I'm going to finish this. You can see this is ugly.
Two more styles of buttons.
Yeah, and so we can take some finish cuts on here. Because I'm going to finish this bowl later, I'm not going to remove this mortise, but this is not something you want in your finished bowl. It's got a sharp edge, it's got torn grain, and at this, when I was finished sanding, and the very last thing I would do is I would do some kind of a shape with that. On that bowl there, I just made it a gentle round. A lot of people will put a little bead there. This is a surface that you can decorate in any number of ways to use your artistry. So that's sort of the last step. But if the bowl's small enough to grip inside these buttons, this thing has a capacity of 14¼ inches to grip. But I can grip something up to about a 16-inch platter if I'm gripping it from the insides. So this would be the last step. We would finish this off, decorate it, sand it, and sign it.
Do you ever cut it away to only leave like 3 legs?
Yeah, you can, but not with a foot ring. I mean, if I wanted to do that, I would make a very narrow foot ring and then you can sand out so it sits on a tripod. And I would definitely do that if this was not bone dry wood. This wood I've had in my shop for about 3 years, and it's it's really not going to move very much. But if I did this with wood that was say 14 or 16% moisture content, I guarantee you it'll move. And if you put it on a ring, if a ring's not in a plane, it's going to wobble. You're not going to want that. So that's something. And if you want to sand it into 3, just sort of like the radioactivity sign, the 3 things. You don't need to take much off. Not even a millimeter, just so that it sits on the 3 points. And you could do that. You could make the foot ring narrower. Or you could decorate it. There are some people that'll put stencils on these things. They'll do all sorts of stuff to add their personal touch to it. So I'm not going to do that because I'm going to want to chuck this back up and finish it. But that would be the 1 hour platter.